antibody infusion is a form of, and we see antibody infusion here, so we'll review what that's referring to. And if we take a look at all our choices, they all are some sort of immunity. Immunity. So now we know that we could focus in on, okay, we're focusing on antibody infusion, and we want to know what kind of immunity the body has after it's received. So let's go through the definition of these types of immunities that are in the question, the active, the passive, and the community immunities. And then we could better understand which one works best for antibody infusion after we review what that means as well. So before we begin, let's just note when we look at the choices here, we see active immunity, passive immunity, community immunity, and vestigial immunity. Now, just of note, vestigial immunity we could eliminate right now because this was just a placeholder of an answer to try and trick you. That's not actually a type of immunity. Vestigial is just a term that has a different meaning related to atrophy and muscles, and it's not related to immunity. So now we've narrowed it down to 3. So let's review the differences. So if you think of active immunity, let's just think of these all in terms of a person. So let's say we have a person here, right? And let's say that they're an active person for this part. So if they're active, they're moving around, they're exercising, they're working towards something. And all of these things occur because they're doing the work for themselves, right? So doing yourself. And this is important because active immunity has to do with the body building an immune response for itself. So how could we have active immunity? Well, let's use the flu as an example for all of these. So let's say that someone gets the flu. They get sick with the flu. Then let's say a month later, they're exposed to the same flu virus that they had already. They will likely either have a very weakened version of that illness, or they may not even have symptoms at all because their body built up an immune response. It recognizes that invader to prevent an illness going forward. Similarly, if someone has the flu vaccine. So similarly, if you get a vaccination against influenza, then let's say similar situation, you're exposed to the flu a few months later, you already have the vaccine and you already have that immune response so that you will either get less sick or you may not even have symptoms at all. And that's because both of these, getting the illness itself or getting vaccinated, create antibodies in the body. So something to note is that when you have this illness, you're not suddenly being infected with an antibody, or if you get vaccinated, you're not suddenly being given the antibody, but your body develops these antibodies on their own to then fight these antigens, which is the illness itself, so that you have a better outcome going forward because you're already used to it, you already recognize it. You could think of the antibodies as almost like experience points. So let's say that maybe you have a coworker and you don't really know them too well and you have, let's say, a bad experience with them. Now, let's say a few months later, there's a new coworker and there's something about their personality that really reminds you of the first person you had a bad experience with. Your experience are kind of like those antibodies that you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to have as bad of an experience this time because I'm prepared. I have the experience. I'm not going to allow this situation to turn into what it was before. So your experience, your antibodies, that's kind of similar. The antigen, the bad coworker, the illness, all very similar. So now let's take a look at passive immunity. So passive immunity would be where if there is an immunity, but it's not because the body built this immunity themselves. So for example, in this question here, we see antibody infusion. So if a person is being infused with the antibodies, so antibody infusion, let's say, they did not work to build these antibodies themselves. So going back to our person over here, we said we're thinking of a person here and we're saying that they're very active in this step. So if they're very passive here, they kind of just take it. So to remember the difference between active and passive, if this person's standing here and let's say another person comes by and just kicks them, and this person over here, our main character right over there, just takes it, whatever, let them kick me. That's very passive. They're not doing anything to actively protect themselves. Very passive. So that could help you remember what passive means in terms of this situation. So passive immunity would mean that the person's just given the antibody. Oh, you're not going to create it yourself. here you go, here it is. So the immunity is not built from the body doing the work, it's because of something on the outside doing the work. And therefore, when we look at our choices here, antibody infusion would be a passive immunity. Because in that situation, a person is being given, probably through an IV or some sort of injection, the antibodies directly. So the body is not developing this on its own, it's just being handed right over passively. So that would be an example of passive immunity. So we know active immunity we could eliminate because that would be where the body develops these antibodies on their own through an illness or through a vaccine. But there's one choice left here, community immunity. So an example of community immunity, or maybe you've heard of herd immunity, would be that you develop an immunity just based on your surroundings within the community. So going back to our example of the flu vaccine, let's say that this is our person here. Let's say that they're there. And let's say that this person is a child in a classroom. And let's say that this child never got sick with the flu, doesn't have the vaccine against the flu. However, in their classroom, let's say that they have a few friends that are in class with them. And let's say that all of these other students all have the flu vaccine. Or maybe they had the flu themselves and they have an immunity themselves. That means that this person will likely not become sick with the flu, not because they built an active immunity or passive immunity or because they had any sort of protection, but just because all of their friends surrounding them, they can't have it, they don't have it, they don't have it, they don't have it. So they can't possibly get this illness because there's no source for it to come from. And this idea of herd immunity has been debated and discussed a lot because it's not always effective. Because next year, let's say all of their friends who had the flu vaccine decide, you know what, actually, I am not going to get it this year. So let's change it to this person is actually going to be just like our main character, no vaccine, no vaccine, no vaccine, no vaccine. Now, this is just an open area for infection because nobody is protected and nobody is surrounded by anybody else who is protected. So therefore, they all are now at equal risk of developing the illness. So that's just something to consider as a side point when you're reading about community immunity. So we can eliminate that. So, therefore, antibody infusion is a form of passive immunity. Of note, another example of passive immunity besides the antibody infusion, we could also look at mother to child. So while a mother is pregnant with the child, they could possibly pass an immunity down to the developing fetus, or through breastfeeding as well. They could also send immunity that way. So breastfeeding. So just of note, other examples of passive immunity, which is our answer to this question, choice B.